And there are people like that who sort of are, in a way, lonely. And loneliness is a very sad thing. What a blessing he is, because we do this together, you know. I could never do it alone.
Back in the glory days of cinema, practically nobody hypnotized the public the way Audrey Hepburn did. Between her glowing charm, effortless class, and legendary roles in Roman Holiday and Breakfast at Tiffany's, she quickly turned into a genuine global icon. Fans saw her as a flawless goddess living out a real-life fairy tale. However, if you strip away the flashing cameras and roaring crowds, her romantic journey was actually incredibly messy. She fell hard, tied the knot 2 different times, and had her soul crushed repeatedly. But as she got older, a single undeniable fact bubbled to the surface. Out of everyone she dated, there was a specific guy she simply could not shake. Honestly, the most beautiful romances usually happen off-camera when nobody is paying attention. Quick question before we unpack her secret love life. Which of her classic flicks is your ultimate guilty pleasure? Drop a comment down below. Now, let us talk about the doomed relationship with William Holden. Around the early 1950s, this rising starlet barely had a clue about the massive success heading her way. Living through the brutal Dutch occupation during World War II gave her an understated grit. She stepped into the American movie scene bringing a natural elegance that starkly contrasted with the flashy egos of the business, proving that chasing empty stardom was never her agenda. At her core, she just craved a normal existence, with a sweet husband and a house full of kids. Everything changed around 1953 when she scored the lead in Sabrina. That project instantly skyrocketed her to mega stardom. Off the clock though, a totally different plot was brewing right out of the spotlight. Enter William Holden. This guy was already Hollywood royalty. Suave, good-looking, and universally loved, he handled his celebrity status like an absolute pro who knew exactly how the industry operated. Since she was still totally overwhelmed by the sudden spotlight, his steady vibe was exactly what she needed. While shooting their scenes, a genuine spark just naturally ignited. They were constantly cracking up between takes, and their chats would last way past wrap time. A basic friendship quickly blossomed into a hush-hush love affair that the whole crew definitely noticed. She was head over heels. Unfortunately, there was a massive red flag standing in their way. He already had a wife. What broke the iconic starlet's heart even further was his past choice to undergo permanent sterilization. That clinical procedure guaranteed he would never father offspring. Since experiencing motherhood remained her ultimate ambition, discovering this painful truth utterly shattered her entire world. Her picture-perfect fantasy was dead on arrival. Despite being madly in love, she ripped off the band-aid and walked out the door. It sucks, but occasionally the purest connections are just not meant to be. Next up was Mel Ferrer, a hopeful but doomed union. Following the Holden disaster, she threw herself entirely into her craft. Studios were throwing massive opportunities her way left and right. Still, no amount of fame could fill the void she felt inside for a real, loving home. She desperately needed a solid foundation. Right around then, she started bonding with Mel Ferrer. This dude was far from your average, superficial leading man. He was super brainy, intensely creative, and lived for the stage. As a gifted artist, he vibed perfectly with her obsession for great books and classic plays. Instead of boring industry gossip, they spent hours talking about deep stuff like philosophy and the human experience. It was like a breath of fresh air for her. They got hitched privately over in Switzerland back in 1954. Everyone genuinely thought she had hit the jackpot with a guy who totally got her fragile heart and crazy work schedule. Initially, everything was coming up roses. They collaborated on set and became each other's biggest cheerleaders. He even bossed her around beautifully in the play Ondine, which eventually scored her a shiny Tony Award. To the public, they looked like the ultimate power couple, oozing pure sophistication. 1960 rolled around, and she finally had her baby boy, Sean. Becoming a parent gave her a massive rush of joy that acting could never touch. Pals noticed how remarkably grounded she became once the baby arrived. Yet, beneath the glamorous premieres and camera-ready grins, their dynamic was seriously souring. Brutal shooting schedules and unspoken resentments drove a huge wedge between the pair. Whispers about massive ego clashes and green-eyed monsters started making the rounds in town, 14 years down the drain, and they officially called it quits in 1968. Even the strongest flames can fizzle out to ash over time, so our girl was back to square one, hunting for that elusive tranquility. Next came Andrea Dotti, the guy promising a fresh slate. Coming off her brutal 1968 divorce, she totally shifted gears into a much more low-key, introspective era. Big studios were still throwing fat checks at her for blockbuster roles. However, the beloved screen siren was actively hitting the brakes and fading from the public eye. Her only priority now was catching a break. While chilling on a Mediterranean boat trip in 1968, she crossed paths with Andrea Dotti, a shrink from Italy. Smart, charismatic, and a total 180 from those toxic Tinseltown dudes. While movie stars thrived on messy drama, Dotti seemed super chill and grounded. She saw this guy as the ultimate do-over. They eloped in Rome back in 1969. Her inner circle kept their fingers crossed that this would be her ticket to a quiet, normal suburban life. Shortly after, she popped out her second boy, Luca. Naturally, being a mum instantly hijacked her entire universe once more. Hiding out in Italy and Switzerland, she blew off Hollywood to focus on her boys. Things felt super steady for a hot minute, until major red flags started popping up. Tabloids caught wind that her new man was sleeping around. She totally played an ostrich at first, burying her head in the sand because she could not stomach another failed marriage. The dirty laundry kept piling up, though. Eventually, the icy tension between them was glaringly obvious, and her white picket fence fantasy shattered all over again. Fast forward to the early 80s, and they were done. Calling it quits with Dotti completely shut the book on yet another tragic attempt at finding a soulmate. Taking that loss stung, but she was definitely used to the pain. Frequently, a so-called fresh start just morphs into another bitter breakup. Then came her absolute retreat from show business. Hitting the late 70s, she had literally accomplished things ordinary folks only dream of. Hailed as a top-tier legend of the 20th century, she was universally adored for Roman Holiday, Sabrina, and Breakfast at Tiffany's. Her undeniable grace and killer fashion sense cemented her as an absolute cultural icon. At this point in the game, however, the glitz and glamour were completely lost on her. Following the mess with Dotti, she made a massive pivot. Rather than chasing Oscars and paparazzi flashes, she unplugged from the matrix to pour her heart into her kids. She constantly bragged that raising her boys was way better than holding any gold trophy or hearing a crowd go wild. Pouring her soul into Sean and Luca, she desperately wanted to provide the safe haven she never had growing up. Those later years lacked the flashing lights of her youth, but they were infinitely more rewarding. Splitting her days between the Swiss mountains and the California coast gave this icon a wonderfully normal existence, far removed from the crazy Hollywood machinery. A major personal shift was also brewing during the 1980s, as she poured her heart into global charity efforts alongside the United Nations Children's Fund. Surviving a brutal childhood war gave her profound empathy for hurting kids everywhere, prompting her to tour devastated global regions to advocate fiercely against starvation and extreme poverty. Championing this cause completely revitalized her spirit, transforming the darling starlet who previously captivated moviegoers into a remarkably profound force. She became a megaphone for the voiceless. It was right inside this deeply empathetic, low-profile era that an unexpected gentleman appeared, finally handing her the profound serenity she desperately craved. That gentle newcomer was Robert Walters. By the dawn of the 1980s, the beloved starlet had permanently retired her exhausting schedule of jumping between movie productions. Glitzy celebrity routines had gradually dissolved into a grounded reality anchored by family ties, deep introspection, and global philanthropy, especially after surviving her own romantic roller coasters. More crucially, she realized that intense stardom rarely delivered the joyful fairy tale that fans projected onto her, paving the way for her serendipitous introduction to Robert Walters. This fellow actor from the Netherlands had built a solid TV career across 2 continents, yet he intentionally steered clear of the suffocating media circus that typically stalks famous entertainers. He radiated a profoundly calm assurance that was incredibly soothing rather than arrogant, and his deeply considerate nature became an absolute game-changer for the weary icon. They crossed paths near 1980 through inner-circle buddies instead of flashy industry events, allowing an organic bond to bloom through genuine talks and common ground rather than tabloid hype. This kind man resonated with her soul on an exceptionally rare level, since they both survived brutal European conflicts and shared the exact same wartime trauma. A shared heritage and wonderfully mellow temperaments let them connect effortlessly, entirely bypassing the stressful expectations that had poisoned her previous romantic endeavors. Moving away from her historically chaotic love affairs, This particular bond stayed entirely off the radar. They avoided flashy tabloid covers, embarrassing controversies, and blinding media scrutiny. What they cultivated instead was a profoundly peaceful, genuine partnership. The duo filled their calendar with serene trips between their Swiss and Californian retreats, fully dedicating themselves to expanding her massive charitable footprint with the United Nations. Close pals observing the legend during this specific era spotted a remarkable transformation, noting that she finally appeared authentically grounded, completely secure, and wonderfully serene. Escaping decades of chaotic affairs ruined by staggering fame and heavy demands, she struck gold with an incredibly tranquil romance, proving that the softest connections frequently hold the most power. Robert Walters proved to be her ultimate soulmate. As the calendar flipped forward, the iconic star intentionally distanced herself from the glitzy entertainment sphere that originally made her a household name. Screaming paparazzi and exclusive red carpets melted into the past, completely replaced by an incredibly grounded daily routine built around her kids, global charity, and a deeply soothing romantic partner. Upon reaching this mature phase, the legendary beauty had already weathered an absolutely exhausting number of devastating relationship disasters. Experiencing an initial crushing split from William Holden, navigating a notoriously messy union to Mel Ferrer, and surviving the bitter letdown alongside Andrea Doy deeply altered her romantic perspective. Yet, discovering that special connection alongside Robert Walters brought an entirely fresh, optimistic energy. Rather than thriving on explosive celebrity passion or desperate media grabs, this unbreakable bond was firmly rooted in unwavering gentleness, immense patience, and profound mutual admiration. Walters fully backed her charitable crusade for UNICEF, frequently flying across the globe to tour impoverished regions by her side. Rather than acting like famous arm candy, he simply served as an unwavering, silent pillar of absolute support. Houseguests consistently marveled at their beautifully synchronized daily flow, which consisted mostly of deep chats, cozy dinners at home, and lengthy strolls completely hidden from the cameras. Embracing pure normalcy was an absolute lifeline after a lifetime trapped under harsh microscopes, right until a brutal medical diagnosis began attacking her physical strength in the early 1990s. Throughout that devastating final stretch, her devoted partner refused to budge from her bed, wrapping her in the exact same steady devotion that sparked their initial spark. At the exact moment she slipped away in 1993, he was holding her hand, proving that their completely ringless commitment was ultimately meant to last a lifetime. Following decades of hunting for a forever partner, an unflashy, late-in-life romance finally handed this icon total salvation, reminding us that genuine devotion rarely needs a loud theatrical script. True romance just sticks around when things get tough. Ultimately, this particular Hollywood legend proves that the most dazzling celebrities still navigate intensely relatable, ordinary, emotional battles. Past that flawless sophistication, the legendary movie roles, and the endless global adoration lived a soul desperately seeking a genuine, permanent romantic bond. After navigating devastating breakups, tricky divorces, and decades under intense public scrutiny, she ultimately discovered pure tranquility through her steady partnership with Robert Walters. That might just be the ultimate takeaway from her incredible journey. The most authentic, soul-shaking connections usually skip the dramatic fireworks and simply refuse to ever walk away. Hit subscribe if you love uncovering the secret realities of vintage cinema icons. We constantly have fresh, unforgettable historical deep dives cooking up just for you.